Hello and welcome back to Proverbs, a letter to my son. This morning we're going to look at part 2 of lesson 10 in Proverbs. And again, we're going to use the King James Version. I want to repeat, as I did in part 1, that this lesson is adult content. It's intended for married couples or engaged couples only. And as we proceed, you'll see why. In part 1, we looked at the adultery and the disastrous end of an adulterous relationship. And this morning we're going to look at how to adultery-proof a marriage. And you'll love it. I love it because I've done the same thing. Now, as we said in part 1, a full 1/3 of the verses in chapters 1 through 9 deal with sexual attitudes and or actions. In lesson 1, we looked at chapter 7, the tricks of the adulterous trade. The last part of chapter 6, a jealous husband, the damage he can inflict on one who violates his wife. And chapter 9, the prostitute and what she offers. And for all of these, the end result is disaster and or death. Now in part 2, we're going to look at parts of chapter 2, which shows us the power we have or can gain in order to refrain from adultery. And then here's where I want to get to, how to adultery-proof a marriage. So let's get started. Look at the power to resist joining an adulteress. Proverbs chapter 2, verses 13 to 18 is where we'll get. But we need first to look at the first part of chapter 2. As you will remember in our study in lesson 6, we saw a passive search for wisdom. We're looking, we're listening, and when we hear or see wisdom, we log it away for future use. But we're not doing any work. We're just letting things happen as they do. And then there's the active search for wisdom, where we actually get out there and we engage in an active search, good books, listening to good preaching, asking advice, and we're actually doing work to gain wisdom. And these two passive and active searches together gain a whole bunch for us. And then the continual search for wisdom. We use the passive search and the active search, and we keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. And then in verse 5, we'll see that then, remember the outline for the chapter? Chapter 2? If you will, if you will, if you will, then you will, then you will, so you will. So these three ifs, the passive, active, and the continual searches. The first then is verse 5. Then you will figure out the fear of the Lord and learn who God is, what he is, and how he works in the affairs of men. So that's the first then. Now the second then says in verses 9 through 11, then thou shalt understand righteousness, justice, equity, and every good path. In other words, you'll learn to live good and godly. When you get to this point, wisdom will enter into thine heart, and knowledge is pleasant to thy soul. If we read it straight through, it says, discretion shall preserve thee, understanding shall keep thee. It sounds like one statement, but actually in the Spanish, it puts the word then between them. So what it really says is, when wisdom entereth into thine heart, and knowledge is pleasant unto thy soul. When you get to this point, and only when you get to this point, then discretion will preserve thee, and understanding shall keep thee. So we need to get to that point. We need to live good and godly. We need to hide the commandments in our heart. Then at that point, they'll preserve us. What's it going to preserve us from? It'll deliver us from the adulterers. Remember, it says, it will deliver thee from evil men and from immoral women. Look at the text, verse 16. To deliver thee from the strange woman, from the stranger that flattereth with her words. So it's going to deliver us from the adulteress. That's the power, but we have to use it. In everything, we need to put in safeguards in place so that they will protect us when an undesirable situation comes along. Notice in the last part of the verse, it will deliver us, but what's the result? Remember I said that the outline is if, then, and so. So, verse 20, that thou mayest walk with good men and keep to the paths of righteousness. So what is it saying? You're going to learn to live good and godly, and you're going to choose good and godly friends. Now, folks, we have the power to resist the adulteress. We have it from the Word. And if it abides in our hearts, it's continually giving us course corrections. And we can use that to keep us from getting involved with this adulterous relationship. Now, when we look at chapter 5, this is where I wanted to get to. We have to wade through the first part to get to where I really want to be. But the power to adultery-proof your marriage. Here's the warning. Son, attend or pay attention to my wisdom. Bow thine ear or listen to what I'm saying, to my understanding. Listen to my understanding. Now, he's going to make two comments, and if you read over them without stopping to see what they say, you miss some important stuff. Because the first statement is, in verse 2 of chapter 5, that thou mayest regard discretion. What is it saying? It took me a long time to see it. Remember, this chapter is dealing with how to adultery-proof a marriage. So what that text is really saying is, recognize when a woman is coming onto you. Recognize when she has designs on you. And don't let it get by you. And then he says that thy lips may keep knowledge. So what's he saying there? Well, tell her you don't want anything to do with it. When you see a young gal that has designs on you, stop it right then. Don't let it keep going on. So these are the things that you can do and should do if this happens to you. I remember one time when I was in the State Guard, we were doing a mission at some fair, and a womanizer that I was working with, after we walked away from a booth, he said, "Man, that gal was coming on to you." And I thought to myself, what woman? I didn't see anything. Wasn't looking for it. He's always looking for it. But to him, that was serious. To me, it didn't matter. I wasn't looking for her. All right, so we're going to recognize when a woman's coming on to you, and you're going to tell her, I don't want anything to do with it. Here's the start of how to adultery-proof a marriage. Now, the enticing words of an adulteress. We saw this in parts of chapter 7 and chapter 6. So, verse 3 of chapter 5, for the lips of a strange woman drip as honeycomb, and her mouth is smoother than oil. Oh, her what she has to say is sweet and so enticing, and it will tend to boost your ego. Be careful, guys. It can get away from you before you know it, because look at verse 4. But her end is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death, and her steps take hold of hell. Recognize the disaster that's waiting if you let her entice you to join her. Look at verse 5. Lest thou shouldst ponder the path of life, her ways were unstable. I'm going to go back now. Notice it says, be careful of her lips. Don't let her get you involved, because it will cost you. But yet the next verse says, lest you should ponder the path of life. That doesn't make sense. When you look at this, lest you should ponder, in the Amplified Bible, it says, she gives no thought to the way of life. And in the New American Standard, it says, she does not ponder the path of life. So that verse should better be translated, she doesn't ponder the path of life. Her ways are movable. Look at that. And Amplified says her ways are crooked. NAS says her ways are unstable. She doesn't have anything consistent about her. She just does whatever comes natural. And then that thou canst not know them, better translated, she doesn't know it. She doesn't know what's happening. She doesn't know the result. And in NAS it says she doesn't know it. So she doesn't know where she's going. She doesn't know the result. She's not consistent in her life. And she doesn't even think about the consequences. So Solomon says, stay away from her. In verse 7 of chapter 5, hear me now therefore, O ye children, and depart not from the words of my mouth. Remove thy way far from her, and come not nigh to her door. In other words, stay completely away from her. And don't go within eyesight to the door of her house. Just stay away. It's like the guy that is a drunk, and he gets saved, and he gives up alcohol. He's warned, don't go near the bar. Don't go where it can tempt you. Stay away from it. And the same thing is true here. So why does he say stay away? Look at verses 9 through 11. Lest thou give thine honor unto others, and thy years unto the cruel one. Lest strangers be filled with thy wealth, and thy labors be in the house of a stranger, and thou mourn at the last, and thy flesh and thy body are consumed. Let's look at these phrases at one at a time. Lest thou give thine honor to other. What's it saying? Lest you trash your reputation. Everyone will know that you were the one who got involved in a relationship. Lest you give thy years to the cruel. You serve Satan for years to come. Don't do that. Lest strangers be filled with thy wealth. Lest you pay lots of money to keep her quiet, and she'll demand money many times. And thy labors be in the house of a stranger. Lest you work hard, and your work only benefits the stranger. And then that thou mourn at the last when thy flesh and thy body are consumed, lest you get some awful disease. So what are you giving up if you engage in an adulterous relationship? Well, you're giving up your honor, your wealth, your strength, and your health. It's not worth it, is it? No, it's not worth it. Notice the last part of that section there. How have I hated instruction, and my heart despised reproof, and have not obeyed the voice of my teachers, nor inclined my ear unto them that instructed me. I was almost in all evil in the midst of the congregation and in the assembly. So this guy's regretting the fact that he got involved. Apparently it didn't cost him his life, but it cost him more than he wanted to pay. So again we see the disastrous end of an adulterous relationship. But now we get to where I wanted to be. Finally, after all this, we see how to adultery-proof your marriage. Let's look at chapter 5 now, and we're looking at verses 15 through the end. Here's the text. Drink water out of thine own cistern, and running waters out of thine own well. What do you know about a cistern? Well, a cistern is water that's run off of a roof and captured in a basin somewhere, typically below ground or right at ground level. It's warm water. It satisfies your thirst when you drink it, but there's nothing special about it. But what about a well? Well, the well is cool, clear water from an underground spring, so refreshing to drink. Okay, so we understand a cistern, we understand a well. What about it? Well, remember, we're talking about word pictures now. So the cistern is picturing your sexual relationship with your wife. There are just the usual times you enjoy sexual intercourse, and it's fine. It's great. But there's nothing special about it. It's the usual. But then there are times that are really, really special. Oh, boy, they are really neat. And you thoroughly enjoy it. So Solomon's saying, drink water out of thine own cistern. So what do you mean, thine own cistern? Your wife, not someone else. Out of thine own well. In other words, engage in sexual intercourse with your wife, both those usual times and those really special times when both of you should enjoy it. Now, here's a verse that's, in a sense, hard to understand, but I'm going to explain it. Let thy fountains be dispersed abroad, and rivers of water in the street. This is another verse that was translated in a way that makes it hard to understand. Let thy fountains be dispersed abroad. What are the fountains? Well, first off, it says, let thy fountains. Better worded should be said, should your fountains be dispersed abroad. Remember, it just said, have sexual intercourse with your wife and no one else. And then it says, what about the fountains? Let's explain that first. The fountains are your sperm. If we read it the way the text says, should your sperm be dispersed abroad? In other words, impregnated in women all over town? Well, no, it's not. But he's saying, should your fountains be? And the answer is no. And it says, and rivers of water in the streets. What's that talking about? That's talking about your illegitimate kids running all over town. if you engage in adulterous relationships, the likelihood is that you're going to have kids out of that. And should you have kids running around town when people know that they're your kids by another woman when you're married to your wife? Well, obviously no. So the text says, let them be thine only and not strangers with thee. That's why we translate, that's why we should better say, should your fountains be dispersed abroad? And the answer is no. And your rivers of water on the street? And the answer is no. It says, let them be thine alone and not strangers with thee. What are them? Well, them are your fountains, your rivers of water, your sperm, your illegitimate, the potential illegitimate kids. Make them legitimate kids, your own, by your own wife. So he's saying, be careful and don't get involved in this. Now, in verse 18, he says, let thy fountains be blessed. What's thy fountains? That's your reproductive capability. Let that be blessed. And then he's going to say, rejoice with the wife of your youth. Let her be as a loving hind and a pleasant roe. Let her breast satisfy thee at all times, and be thou ravished always with her love. Notice it says, rejoice with the wife of your youth. Rejoice. Don't just live with her, but rejoice. And then it says, let her breast satisfy thee at all times. It's common knowledge that men love to caress or kiss a woman's breast. Make it your wife's, not someone else's. Notice also it says to be ravished always with her love. Now, you may say, yeah, but you don't know my wife. Guys, have you ever stopped and had a serious one-on-one conversation with your wife and asked her, honey, is our sexual engagement satisfying to you? The reason I ask that, our daughter was a nurse in the hospital in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. And she and other nurses were talking one day, and numbers of those nurses says, when it comes to sexual relationship with my husband, I feel used. They don't enjoy it at all. Why? Because the husband is not concerned about meeting her needs. This is the kind of woman that would go out looking for satisfaction somewhere else. So I'm going to try to help, guys, I'm going to try to help you see how you can help your wife enjoy the relationship so that when we look at this section of verses that says, be ravished with her love, let her satisfy thee, rejoice with your wife, you can truly do that. Years ago, my wife and I had a decent sexual relationship. She enjoyed it, but I wanted her to thoroughly enjoy the relationship. You might say, well, wait a minute, you don't know my wife. She's cold. She's cold. Well, guys, that's on you. And here's why. Years ago, I decided that I wanted my wife to thoroughly enjoy the sexual encounter. So I decided that I would not satisfy myself. I would not penetrate her. I would spend the whole time trying to help her enjoy it, caress her and find things that she found really pleasant. But the key is that I wanted her to understand that I was concerned about her welfare, not my own. And after a little bit of time, she realized I really am majoring on her and not me. And she enjoys the sexual relationship much more now than we did. And guys, if you will have a serious discussion with your wife and allow her to tell you what she's really feeling, then she would tell you, says, no, I'm not enjoying this at all. You're satisfying yourself and not me. And then you can engage in a time or a period of time when you major on her. You find what she finds pleasant. And then once she starts to enjoy the relationship, you go back to go ahead and fulfill yourself, but satisfy her first. And what you will find is that your sexual union will become so sweet, and she will enjoy it enough where she will want to meet your needs, not just endure it. Donna's mom said to her one time, says, what's in it for a woman? So apparently her granddad didn't satisfy her, didn't try to. He just met his own needs. And I would bet that there are numbers of men out there, even listening to me right now, who are not satisfying their wives' needs. And then when the wife goes out and finds someone who will and gets involved in an adulterous relationship, you're like, what happened? Well, guys, it's on you. And you have the opportunity to help your wife progress in this area of enjoying the sexual encounter with you. I found it fascinating. I taught this at a class at a previous church. And a couple weeks later, I was going down the hall, and one of the couples that was in the class came by, both of them smiling, and as they walked by, they said, we're practicing what you taught us. And I thought, great, you guys are going to benefit from it. But folks, you can too. So I encourage you, take the time. Help your wife enjoy it. Don't let her go on merely enduring the sexual relationship. Help her to enjoy it. Back to our text, it says, why wilt thou, my son, be ravished with a strange woman and embrace the bosom of a stranger? We talked about this in session 1 of chapter 10, part 1. You can lay down and engage in sexual relationship with another woman, close your eyes, don't hear anything, and the physical sensation is the same. What do you benefit? Absolutely nothing. But if you will work at getting your wife to enjoy the relationship, then you can really rejoice in her and you can be ravished with her love. Keep in mind, people will see the result if we get involved in an adulterous relationship. They won't know whether you're satisfying your wife or not. That's between you and her. But the Lord is watching everything we do. For the ways of man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he ponders or observes and evaluates all his goings. He sees your heart attitude. He sees whether or not you are concerned about your wife. He's as concerned about that as other things, because he wants the marriage to be strong. Notice the end result of all this, if we don't accomplish that, the wicked man's own sinful desires will be the thing that generates his demise. His own iniquity shall take the wicked himself, and he shall be holden with the cords of his sin. He shall die without instruction, and in the greatness of his folly he shall go astray. Guys, I encourage you, put safeguards in place. And the best safeguard that you can have, there are two of them. One is satisfy your wife. See that she's satisfied with your sexual relationship with her, and she'll want to meet your need. And the other is, when you're out and you see a beautiful woman, you tell yourself, she's not mine. I have no right to her. Besides, everything I could find in the arms of that woman, I can find in the arms of my wife at home. And it'll be true. So guys, get with your wife. Have a frank discussion. Let her tell you how she really feels without feeling that she's going to be put down for it. Do you really care about her? Do you really care about her welfare? Have that discussion. And then once you find out where she is in the relationship, work on it. Help her to enjoy it. Don't let her go on just enduring it. Well, guys, that's my heart. I hope it'll help you. I really do. Now, I'll hope to see you in Lesson 11. Thank you.